Like many radicals, Charles can be difficult to introduce. He cuts down to root causes, and as a result, he transcends the usual categories: philosopher, activist, economist, historian, anthropologist. He can be a little tough to pin down. But what I've come to see as one of Charles's greatest gifts is his ability as a storyteller. We are here today to hear him weave a compelling story about the arc of human history and in fact, the universe and our place in it. This story with a capital S is one of a new world, a more beautiful world of generosity and interconnection, gift and relationship. Far different from the old stories, so full of war, environmental devastation, economic hardship, and separation and despair. This new story contains an understanding that we are deeply connected, that what I do to you, I do also to myself. I have caught glimpses of this world. How about you?
Yeah.
I remember sitting in the interfaith tent in the final hours of the Occupy Boston encampment. There was drumming and helicopter blades swirling around, tremendous chaos as the encampment came down. But I sat there with a few other people and just felt this deep sense of peace and wonder. It was as if a portal had opened up there, where I could literally see into a more beautiful world. It was a radically different world, shaped not by separation, but instead by a story of reunion and interconnection. So to help tell that story, it's my great pleasure to welcome Charles Eisentein to the Jamaica Plain Forum.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. So my voice is a little shaky right now, so I'm going to use this, and it just makes me feel somehow. I had the flu like a week ago, and all of me's better except for my voice. And yeah, it's making me feel a little bit soft. I think that maybe I should clarify right at the beginning, and probably a bunch of you are thinking it already, that the new story isn't actually very new, but it's a very ancient story. And in fact, new, the kind of fetish for the new, could be considered part of the problem, and ironically enough, new could be considered part of the old story, where always we're trying to move beyond the matrix of relationships that have held us, move beyond tradition, out with the old, in with the new, onward and upward. And I think we all recognize that that's part of the problem. So I'm just starting with a little disclaimer here, that the new story isn't new, it's very, very ancient. But it's a story that we've forgotten in our culture, or forgotten most of it. What would be new would be to build a civilization on the understandings that I'm going to name in a few minutes, that I call the new story. That would be new, because our civilization is built on the story of separation. And I don't know, probably a lot of you are pretty familiar, or at least a little bit familiar with my writing and stuff, but maybe I'll just go over the story of separation just for a minute or two. Maybe a mythology is a better word than a story for it. But it's the set of answers that we give ourselves to really, really basic questions of life. Every culture has different answers to questions like, who are you? What's important in life? Where do we come from? Where are we going? What's valuable? How does the world work? What's the nature of this universe? What is a human being? And increasingly, for centuries, even thousands of years, some answers have emerged that are basically along the lines of, yeah, who you are is this discrete, separate individual in a universe of other. And this universe is devoid of the qualities of a self. Those qualities exist in human beings alone, and maybe a little bit in animals, and maybe a tiny, tiny bit in plants, but not really, and certainly not in rocks, and rivers, and clouds, and the sun, and the moon. These things are devoid of the properties of a self, the properties that we have, the qualities of intelligence, desire, purpose, intention. So when I'm talking about a new story, it's not just, oh, we're all one, or everything in the world is part of me. Everything that happens to me is happening to everybody on some level. And anything I do to the world, I'm doing to myself. It's not only that. It's also a healing of this profound alienation we have from the rest of, well, we're in a church, so I'll call it the rest of creation. It's this profound alienation that we have, that we're alone in the universe, that we are the only selves. And it's, we're the only culture, really, that's ever believed this. And even as children, we don't believe this, that we're separate, and that the sun is not alive. Every child knows that the sun is a being, and the tree is a being. The tree is having thoughts, feelings. The tree, of course, the tree has desires. It's so natural to speak of what the tree wants. I mean, we still do it, actually, even as adults, what the planet wants, But our ideology says that these beings cannot have desires, so we say, well, those childhood perceptions, those were just anthropomorphic projections. But actually, the river, it doesn't have desires. It's just a bunch of H2O molecules. And the sun is a ball of burning hydrogen gas, fusing hydrogen gas. And that's all there is to it. And if you're, okay. Many of us in this room might recognize that attitude as kind of a philosophical colonialism, where we, in the West, set ourselves up as the ones who know what's best for everybody else, and here's what you should think if you want to understand the world and to be effective in this world. We have an answer here. And very often that way of thinking goes along with economic colonization. And we somehow recognize that they're part of the same thing. But I'd like to propose to you that every single one of us in this room is nonetheless inhabited by that old story of separation that sees us as separate individuals in a universe that operates according to impersonal, deterministic laws of force. Even if you understand quantum mechanics and you know that the laws of physics are not actually necessarily that deterministic, am I getting too nerdy I'm just going to say that this old story of separation inhabits us. It's been ingrained into us. Because when push comes to shove, at least speaking for myself, I find that I'm not often acting as if there were an intelligence and a purpose inherent in everything. But we've always known that there is. And so what do we do with this feeling, this perception? Well, one thing we can do with it is we can say, yeah, matter is just a bunch of dead, purposeless stuff, and this feeling of purpose and intelligence and aliveness, that is due to something outside of matter. That's due to spirit, or something like that, or to God. And so we take, that's one response, is to say, the scientists are right about matter, but there's this other realm. And that's actually a way of agreeing with the scientists. Everybody's agreeing with it, and it allows us to treat matter as if it were just a bunch of dead, purposeless stuff, which is how we've been treating the planet, and now we're recognizing that's part of the problem. So, even if we say, we've got to stop seeing the Earth that way, and we've got to understand that, and we have to honor all beings, and even the physical processes of nature as alive and sacred. But then, when push comes to shove, what about how do we actually take action? We're still very much, well, maybe I should use the word we here. I'll come back to that in a minute. I've been writing an article on climate change because I was a bit disturbed by something that I noticed about the standard climate change narrative. And this is something that's really in a lot of people's minds now. So much of the despair that I run into has to do with the very strong case that can be made that the situation is already pretty hopeless. I don't know if you've heard people like Guy McPherson, or even Bill McKinnon, making a very strong case that we've already passed the tipping point. We're facing not just 2 or 3 or 4 degrees, maybe 6 degrees, maybe 8 degrees of climate change in 1 century, and you can make a pretty strong case for despair. So I've become interested in this. And there was something that disturbed me about the standard narrative. Because it's this thing, this all-important issue that trumps everything else. Marie was telling me, I think it was Marie was telling me about this talk by Bill McKibben, and somebody said, well, what about building community? He said, not important. When the sea level rises 30 feet, your community is going to be washed away. Well, what about taking care of your grandmother in the nursing home and going to visit her when you could be campaigning to stop climate change? What about all of these small invisible acts that hold society together? What about all of these? And I noticed then the mentality of ending climate change or campaigning against climate change is very similar to the mentality of war. where there's this all-important thing that trumps everything else, and everything must be sacrificed to this whatever, civil liberties, quality of life. All of these things have to be sacrificed toward this external, this instrumental, this all-important life and death situation. And we've got it, and that has to come first. And it's also very similar to the mentality of money. The mentality of money, this number, and here, CO2 levels, temperature, it's a number, and in order to maximize this number, all of these little things, these qualitative things, these things that you cannot predict how they're going to make the number go up. Those things are the things that get sacrificed. And actually, it's a little bit similar to the mentality of mainstream religion, too, where, again, there's an all-important end to which must be offered sacrifice. So that can, in its distorted form, can take us away from the immediacy of the here and now. So I thought, I'm a little suspicious of this narrative, which isn't to say that I don't believe that greenhouse gases are changing our planet. But the response, so global warming's happening. What's the cause? We look for this kind of linear, immediate cause. CO2, and other greenhouse gases. So the solution will be to reduce CO2 levels. And what about another problem? What about school shootings? Well, those are caused by guns. So the solution is to keep guns out of the schools with metal detectors and security guards and cameras and things like that. And what about disease? How do we prevent ourselves from getting diseases? Well, diseases are caused by germs, so we've got to keep out the germs. And what's the solution to drugs? The drug epidemic? Well, we've got to stop the drugs from coming in. And so in all of these situations, there's actually, we're making something very simple that's actually very complicated. What's the real cause of drug addiction? Is the cause drugs? Is the real cause of illegal immigration immigrants? Is the real cause of illness these enemies, these germs out there that have no purpose because there's no intelligence in the world? But as we accept that there is intelligence inherent in all things, then we begin to look at these problems in a different way. And we think, well, maybe I got the flu because that's part of a cycle of health. And my body invited those germs in because it was time to go through this intense cleansing and deepening process that I went through. And maybe the cause of climate change, maybe CO2 levels are themselves just a symptom. And the real cause is well, actually, like on a kind of biological, physical level, I think that the real cause is the degradation of the homeostatic mechanisms that the planet uses to maintain balance, which is the forests, the biodiversity, the marine life. And when these are depleted, then this biosphere becomes less able to handle challenges like rising CO2 levels. And that we're not living on just this ball of rock with a biological scum on top of it, but it's an interconnected system. So that communicates with itself in ways that we're just barely beginning to understand. For example, the mycelial networks. Marie and I were talking about this in the car. It used to be a couple hundred years ago that the trees here in Massachusetts were in communication with the trees in Alabama. There was an unbroken mycelial network that covered the entire eastern half of this country. And that's been broken into pieces, lacerated by roads and things like that. And so the Earth can't communicate with itself anymore. And so it loses its ability to maintain homeostasis. So, but even if you're limited just to CO2, and what's causing CO2 emissions? Why do we seem so unable to stop, even after 1992 agreeing that we were going to stop? We were going to slow it down. We were unable to do that. Why? You have to look at the causes of consumerism, don't you? Why do we keep producing things that don't even serve human well-being? So I think that as our perception shifts toward seeing this world outside of ourselves as an interconnected living system, then we begin to understand that the linear causality is only a tiny piece of the puzzle. So, after a talk one time, and guys, I'm kind of like threading a few different things together. Hopefully by the end it'll come into a coherent picture. But it doesn't always. Okay? But basically, right, but I'm hoping it will, and what I'm basically doing is just drawing out different threads of what I've been calling a new story. And today the one that's been on my mind more is the idea that the world outside of ourselves bears the qualities of a self. Something that had seemed profoundly unscientific, this kind of superstitious belief, animism, you might call it. Today it's not as unscientific. Many of what we might call the new sciences are affirming this understanding. Complexity theory, for example, where order spontaneously emerges out of chaos, where beauty spontaneously emerges without any design. And you look at something like the Mandelbrot set, this beautiful mathematical object, and you're like, why is it like that? There must be a reason. There must have been an artist that conceived this and designed this. But there isn't. It's just like that. That's the way that reality is. It's just like that. It's inherent. This thing that we thought needed a designer to impose it is actually part of reality itself. And this is hard for us to accept. We're so used to thinking that if there's design, there must be a designer. If there's order, there must have been some entity that ordered it, something outside. This is the template of technology. This is how our civilization has approached the world. We've seen it as this generic collection of particles, of building blocks, that if it doesn't have an inherent purpose, then we should impose our purpose upon it. Because why not? There's nothing to interfere with. And because these forces of nature are indifferent to human well-being, this logic says that our well-being then can only come through controlling this substrate of dead matter outside of ourselves. And that our destiny, therefore, as a human species, our destiny is to perfect this control over the indifferent or hostile universe of force outside of ourselves. And that was part of the old story. story of the people that said that, yeah, human destiny is to harness all of the forces of nature and to develop perfect understanding of physical processes. Therefore, we would be able to have perfect control over these physical properties and insulate ourselves from the random forces of nature and become the lords and masters of nature. That was the mythology. As we awaken to the error of that perception, a different approach to technology becomes more reasonable. That seeks to understand the intelligence or the purpose in the world outside of ourselves, and then to participate in it, or even to serve it. When I was in Turkey a couple months ago, there was an Iranian guy in our group. His grandfather was an architect, a Sufi architect. And so here's an example of another approach to technology. He said his grandfather told him when they wanted to build a mosque, the first thing that they did was they would go and sit in the plaza where the mosque was to be built for days or weeks or even months until he could see the mosque that wanted to be there. And it reminded me of some things that permaculture farmers have told me. I was visiting an eco-village, Tamara, in Portugal, and they were describing how they decided where to build the water retention lakes that they use to replenish the aquifer and to hold the water so that it can sink into the earth. And they said something very similar. They said, yeah, the guy who helped us design these, he came and he just stayed on this land for months until he saw where the water wanted to be. It's hard to translate that into scientific language, where the water wanted to be. And maybe we could explain that as some kind of metaphor, some kind of code for a unarticulated understanding of hydrodynamics or something like that. But they meant it quite literally, where the water wanted to be. And we're the only culture that's ever been on this planet, I think, that would have trouble with the concept of where the water wanted to be. Because our ideology has said that water could not have desires. Water could not have these qualities of itself that belong to human beings alone. But any two samples of water are identical, right? We know the formula, H2O. But again, here's where some of the new sciences are coming in. Two samples of water are not identical. And this isn't just, Emoto and this and that, you've all seen those photographs. And I think it's really beautiful work, but there's been a lot of criticism about it too. But there's some pretty hardcore science that is saying the same thing now, but I'm not going to go into that now. I'm going to now jump off this thread and bring up one more, which came up today. So I was just leading this weekend thing at Kripalu, and I done it again last year. One of the staff members who had been there both years said, the group is really different this year. Last year it was much heavier. And there was a lot more despair. This year, there's kind of a different feeling. And maybe it's just this group, but I seem to be feeling it everywhere. And I'm wondering, and I'm feeling it too. Just as it actually started late last year. I'm feeling it too as I go around. Even though the news is just as bad as ever, if not worse, people are starting to feel more optimistic for no good reason. There's this upwelling feeling of optimism that actually might trigger a countervailing feeling of pessimism. Like, how could you, Charles, be optimistic? Have you read the news? Where is this coming from? It's like the old story is wearing thin, and more light is coming through. And by wearing thin, let me give you an example. It's like nobody really believes it anymore, but everybody is still walking around thinking everybody else is believing it because everybody is acting as though they believe it. I keep referring to this Spanish intellectual whose name I forget, but I've got to look it up and memorize it. But he wrote this article that I thought was very insightful. He said, it was about the mainstream media. He said the power of the mainstream media to create reality does not depend on anybody believing what it says. Its power to create reality does not depend on even one person believing it. It depends upon everybody believing that everybody else believes it. Because then you're in disagreement with it, but it's a secret disagreement, a lonely disagreement. And that is what's beginning to lift right now as we look around, and in some subtle way we signal, I don't really believe that, do you? No, you don't either. And so this transition, like I look at billboards, advertising billboards, and sometimes it strikes me that not a single person reading that billboard believes it. like, I don't know, like take a slogan, Miller beer, fresh beer tastes better. That's what it says, that's a Miller beer slogan. Yet, not a single person actually believes that Miller beer is fresher. Not the person who wrote that doesn't believe it. The company doesn't believe it. Nobody believes it. And this kind of there's this kind of this cynical, kind of jaded distancing from the dominant narratives of our society. When I was a kid, man, 4th of July, 1976, the bicentennial, 4th of July, everybody was full of real patriotic feelings. We were, all that red, white, and blue stuff. It wasn't just like some little game for the kids, But now I find even among conservatives, the patriotism is very hollow. It's kind of just like an emblem. It's an identity emblem, but it's not a deep belief. The stories that run our culture are wearing thin. And at first, it's like the story of the emperor's new clothes. You guys all know that story, right? He's parading around naked because everybody has been told that only the wise can see these clothes. So everybody wants to be thought wise. Until a little boy is like, hey, the emperor's completely naked. And everybody's like, yeah, the emperor's completely naked. Today, though, where we're still kind of at is someone says the emperor is completely naked, and you see that too, but you don't want to agree with him because what are people going to think about you? And that's, now obviously like a lot of us in this room probably have been shouting the emperor is completely naked for years and years and years. But there's that little part of you maybe that wonders if maybe you're crazy. You know, like I'll drive down the street, you know, one of these Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, where in front is full of these four-lane, four-lane strips, you know, with auto dealerships, fast food restaurants, you know, and one ugly building after another. And I'm like, am I the only person who thinks that this is just an insult to the landscape and to 5,000 years of architectural development that we live in an ugly world? Like, am I crazy for thinking that is unacceptable? Or am I crazy for thinking that you're not supposed to hate Monday? Which is something that's completely normal in our society, to hate Monday. You know, it's only radio. Thank God it's Friday. And so it's been a lonely journey for many of us who have been exploring different aspects of the new story, which maybe I'll call it the story of interbeing. Interbeing, as Thich Nhat Hanh puts it. Each of us exploring in different ways. And I think that kind of that loneliness is beginning to lift now as we look around and more that's reflected back to us. Yeah, I see the world that way too. You're not crazy. It's very hard to maintain a belief in isolation because we are not separate individuals. We are social beings. And I call it the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible. Greg, at the beginning, we were talking about these glimpses that we get. All of us have seen for these moments what life is supposed to be, and how beautiful the world could be. Maybe if you are occupied, there was that moment where everybody was contributing exactly what was needed at the right moment, and it wasn't because people were paid to do it, and it wasn't because someone was giving orders and being in charge of it. It was just happening. And at that moment, you knew that this wasn't some excursion from reality, but this is the way that it's supposed to work. That this is a promise, a glimpse of something real, a place that we can get to. We don't know how to get there, but we know that there's a there. Why? Because we saw it. It's not ideology. We saw it. And we've all had those experiences of connection. Maybe at the bedside of a dying person or in nature in some special moment or a psychedelic moment or something like that. And you know that it's not just a trip away from reality. You know that you're being shown a destination that you can reach. And then you come back from the experience surrounded by institutions of the old story that pull you back. But something has changed because you have been to this other place. And that knowledge has been awoken. It's burning now. And it burns and burns and burns, but for it to really catch you on fire, it's like, the charcoal grill when all the coals are close enough together, when there's enough of them and they generate enough heat that the flame, and that's kind of the moment that we're reaching right now. But we don't know how to get there. Because according to everything that the old story's understanding of cause and effect tells us, according to that, it is impossible. It's impossible to save this planet as a livable habitat for mass numbers of human beings. I mean, even, look, take a look at what's politically feasible right now and what's actually necessary. What's actually necessary? Well, what's politically feasible might be to freeze carbon emissions at 2010 levels. I mean, neither political party is advocating anything of the sort, but you could maybe imagine a scenario where if you could raise enough funds and have enough lobbyists, and get people motivated and intense grassroots action, you could maybe plot out a scenario where we could achieve that, but that's not what's needed. What's needed probably is like a 90% reduction in the next 10 years. That's actually not that hard. We could have fabulous lives and still do that. But that's a whole other talk. But it would require a political miracle for that to happen. And we could go through all kinds of other issues, peak phosphorus, or desertification. There's a lot of really bad things happening. And not to mention the kind of society we would have to have for those changes to happen. We would have to have, massive prison reform. We have to empty the prisons. We have to have public investment shift towards bicycles instead of roads. I mean, there's so many things that would have to happen on level after level after level. It would take a miracle for that to happen, and we have no idea how to make it happen. So this, the despair that comes from that, the despair that is implicit in that impossibility is coming from the same place that all of the problems are coming from. It's coming from the same place that the crisis is coming from, because that despair comes from our understanding of how change happens in this universe. And that understanding is summarized by the word force. It goes back 300-400 years to Galileo, actually. He said, the way that change happens is that force is exerted on a mass. If you want to change a big thing, you have to be able to exert a lot of force, or organize lots of people to exert a lot of force. And these things don't just happen by themselves, because the universe out there isn't intelligent. Nothing in an organized way, a purposeful way, is going to happen by itself. The world works by force. And that's a recipe for despair. One, because you're just a single person. How much force do you have at your disposal? Secondly, even if you can convince lots of people to help you, the powers that be have way more force than you do. The military, industrial, prison, medical, pharmaceutical, agricultural, educational complex has more force than all of us put together. And so it's hopeless. And bringing it back to climate change, it means that anything that you're doing in your life that isn't in some predictable way contributing to the force-based sequence of cause and effect that's going to save this planet, well, that's a waste of time. But we know better. So I was talking to Kali Lawson, who's the founder of Adbusters, who nobody can accuse of being a softie. No one can accuse him of being not active. He's hands-on, culture jamming, direct action, political, highly political for 30 years. And he said, recently I haven't been very active in the magazine or politically because I've been taking care of my 95-year-old mother-in-law instead. Going to her house every day, spending time with her, helping her shopping, changing her bedpan. taking care of her. And he said, and to be honest, that's much more important to me than any of my political work. And I said, I refuse to live in a universe in which that perception is wrong, in which that perception of this is the most significant and important thing I can be doing now is wrong. Because isn't that the discounting of those things? Isn't that the origin of the problem? What did we sacrifice for the sake of the big things, the abstract things, the money? When you're faced with those choices, you know what's important. You know what the right thing to do is. But we don't have a logic that can affirm that knowing. Which is why when somebody asks me after a talk, they ask me, who do you admire most, Charles? Who's your hero? Who's your hero? They were thinking maybe I'd say, Gandhi or something. But I said, no, it's the people doing these invisible things that are holding the fabric of the world together. The woman who's taking care of her grandmother every day after work, while all her friends are going out, developing their careers. And maybe even the grandmother doesn't appreciate it. Maybe the grandmother yells at her, Like, the kind of work I do is easy. Because, I get, a lot of affirmation, people like, hey, Charles, you're being, such a good person, you're going out and changing the world, and I get to pat myself on the back, yeah, I'm contributing to the solution, so that's quite easy to do that. The really strong souls are the ones doing the invisible work. And it just doesn't add up to me to say that those choices have less of an effect on the universe than the choices that Barack Obama makes. And this is something, I'm just going to submit to you that this is something that we know. We can feel it. But it contradicts our logic. Because our logic is based on this old story understanding of how change happens in the universe, cause and effect. But as we step into the new story, this the heart knowledge no longer conflicts with our mental knowledge, because in the new story, of interbeing, of course, anything you do has cosmic significance because everything is connected. Everything that happens to you, every struggle that you go through, is done on behalf of all beings. Everything that I do radiates out into the world and eventually comes back to me. This is a logic that we're just starting to become familiar with. And as we immerse ourselves in it, then it's a lot easier to listen to these impulses that come from the heart. And I think one of the best things that we can do for each other is to hold each other in that knowing and to affirm it for each other and say, yeah, that is how the universe works. Maybe I don't want to go on too long because I want to let the next part arise organically through people's questions. And the guy standing up in front of everybody is also part of the old story too. But I'm just going to connect it to something really practical. I want to connect this to political action. because the habits of separation, the habits of applying force as the technology to change are rampant in our political culture and in the activist culture as well. So, I recently, researching this article, I looked up biodiversity on Google. Biodiversity, and the number 2 result for biodiversity was a website that said something like, why should we care about biodiversity? And I went in there and it gave various reasons that were the economic losses from loss of biodiversity, or this many $1 trillion, and it gave all of these kind of, and medicines can be made from the species that are being exterminated, and every single one of the reasons was basically saying you should be scared because something bad will happen to you with the loss of biodiversity. So the assumption, and you see a lot of this, like why should we stop climate change? Well, because of our grandchildren. Because of the future generations, they won't have a planet to live on. You better be scared about that. Or more and more, you're seeing an appeal to the economics of it. It's going to cost it's going to cause this amount of economic losses. So basically, there's an assumption under here that says that you don't really care about the species that are dying. I know you. You don't care about that. So I'm going to have to bribe you or scare you into caring. I can bribe you by making you feel guilty, by making you feel ashamed of your consumer habits. I can scare you with the economic consequences, or maybe even the consequences for your physical survival. Suppose it's a corporation whose behavior you're trying to change. Mr. Executive, I know you. You don't give a shit. You just want to maximize your rational self-interest. Because isn't that what we've been taught is the fundamental motivation of a human being by economics? You just want to maximize your rational self. I know you. You're a bastard. So I'm going to offer you PR benefits. And I'm going to threaten you with shame and with lawsuits. And I'm going to use pressure. And so the language is all about pressure. How do we pressure them to do it? And what about all of those people out there who just don't get it? What about all of the apathetic masses? How do you make them care? So again, there's these scare tactics and shame and guilt. But if you look at, from the perspective of intervening, that knows that what happens anywhere is happening to you, we realize that the destruction of the biosphere is very painful, and that our natural response is to love what's really part of ourselves and to feel pain and grief at its destruction. From that understanding, we would adopt very different political tactics. We would seek to create conditions where people can feel love and grief, where people can appreciate the beauty and feel the loss. Because we'd be saying, I know you. You're somebody who fundamentally cares deeply about this beautiful planet, who's maybe under tremendous pressure to ignore that caring, who maybe is living in a whole ideology that insulates you from that caring. But I know who you really are. And how can I create conditions to put you in touch with that? I know you, you're like me. And that's the antithesis of separation. And this isn't just a theory. Sometimes I run into people who are standing very strongly in this perception of oneness, and they are extraordinarily effective. Thinking of my friend Pancho in Oakland, Pancho Ramos-Stiro. What does it take to stop a gang of armed thugs in their tracks? How much force do you need to clean up a neighborhood full of gangsters? Well, one time, he moves into this neighborhood. It's a somewhat scary looking neighborhood. I've been there. And he's like, yeah, a couple blocks over, there's the crack house, there's gunshots were fired over there 2 nights ago, it's a somewhat scary kind of neighborhood. And he's always like, every person in the street is greeting him, hey, hermano, hey, brother, just no matter who they are, and people burst into these smiles, and he's totally fearless. So someone there told me a story about him. He said he was out in the street, and it was some time ago, and there was a gang, I didn't know it yet, and this gang of young men was robbing him. Armed robbery, he was being mugged. And just at that moment, a police car pulls up. Someone had seen it, called the police. The police car pulls up, sirens blaring, lights flashing. And the gang runs, and Pancho runs with them. And they get away. And then they turn to him, and they're like, dude, you don't understand. We were robbing you. Why are you running with us? And he says, no, you don't understand. You guys are my brothers. We all live in this neighborhood. You're my brothers. And they're like, okay. Whatever, strange guy. But then Pancho keeps following them. And after a while, they're like, what do we have to do to get rid of you? He says, you have to shake my hand. And so every one of them shakes his hand. And now some of those guys are peace workers, because he refused to see them according to a story in which they are irredeemable. That's the kind of way that how we see allows miracles to happen. And we need a lot of miracles right now. A miracle being something that's impossible from an old story and impossible from a new story. And that's another reason why optimism is rising. Because as the world falls apart, as the old story falls apart, as all of the meanings that it gave us fall apart, as our sense of what's real and permanent and important falls apart, as our sense of how the world works falls apart, as all of the institutions built on separation, built on the conquest of nature, built on the assumption of competition built on the war against the self, built on the paradigm of control, fall apart. The educational system, the medical system, the political system, the money system. As all of this crumbles, a different logic takes over, and things that didn't fit into that story start happening. You may have had this happen in your life when things fell apart and you found yourself in some new city, no job, no relationship, you didn't know anybody, and then the synchronicities start happening. And you discover there's some implicate order that guides life. You may have experienced this on a personal level in times of breakdown, and that is now beginning to happen on a collective level. Things begin to happen that we didn't have room for in our story of what's possible. And these things show us that our understanding of what's possible, our understanding of reality was a little bit too small. So you can say that a miracle is not only something that's possible in a new story. A miracle, I'm not talking about God interfering in the laws of physics, but it could be something that happens that shows you that your understanding of the laws of physics was too small. It could be that. But the miracles, the unexplained things, they happen and they say to you, they're an invitation. They say reality and your own creative power are bigger than you thought. What does it take to stop 5,000 riot police from beating people up? What does it take? How much force do you have to have? Well, how about piano? That's what happened in Gezi Park. And the eviction was supposed to happen that night. And this German guy comes in with his grand piano somehow and has it set up, and he's playing the piano, and the police are paralyzed. because that piano music disrupted the story that they were living in which they had to clear these troublemakers and these like it didn't fit into that story. Okay. I think I'm going to let's just do I want to say one more thing? I'm going to come back to say one more thing. Let me let's just have comments and questions from the audience, because there's a lot more to be said.
I'm going to thank the videographer for suggesting that I ask a question. So Charles, thank you so much for giving us an excuse for having togetherness on this cold night. I think this in itself is an answer. In the new paradigm, I have a question for everyone and not just for you. I hope that's okay. Kindness is in our nature. Getting along, working together is in our nature. We are like a bird who has forgotten how to fly. We are a bird, we have everything we need to fly together. How do we remember? And you can answer it too.
I think that even humanity's journey of separation is part of a larger, necessary, and beautiful process. There was a time when I thought it was just all one huge mistake, a fall from the enchanted hunter-gatherer state. But I think that on some level we made this journey purposefully. And yeah, we've reached a point where we've almost forgotten how to be human. Almost forgotten the truth. But we brought some reminders with us. And some of the reminders come from indigenous people who have, in isolated parts of the world, preserved knowledge and ways of being and ways of knowing that we need to tap into now. So we're kind of nearing a time of reverse colonialism, where it's no longer that we're going to the primitive areas to bring them development, but we're realizing our helplessness and needing to go and learn from them. I'll relate just a tiny little story from my book, from my friend Cynthia Jewers, who was in Africa, and she was visiting the Dogon, a tribe which is somewhat untouched, more than most, by westernization. And she was like, the land is being encroached on, the planet is being destroyed. You know what's going on here. Don't you feel urgency as I do to do something about it? And the elder said, urgency isn't something that we have here. And I heard the story and I thought, yeah. Or is this yet another realm in which we, the white man, have to go and school the natives on how best to solve the problems? Is this just, another way that we have to enlighten them? Oh no, we have to be really urgent. Or is our urgency part of the problem? Is our efficiency, our that whole mindset, is that part of the problem? I don't think that we're really going to have a deep change by because that's the mindset of money, really, the mindset of efficiency. I don't think we're going to have a very deep change by taking that mindset and away from money and applying it onto stopping climate change instead. Yeah. Thank you.
What you are presenting in light of how we're handling or perceiving or treating our feminine energy on the planet, our intuition. You talked about force and versus like intuition and force versus vibration. You talked about the planet and everything being alive and alive with vibration. And what do you think about the role of honoring the feminine, not scaring others, but motivating through love? I think a lot about our advertisements, more and more as I get older, and it's a purpose of mine to create more empowering visions of women and men interacting together. And I think it's key because I'm not going to get into this thing where I say like, oh, these are feminine qualities and masculine, even though I'm probably going to trip over that a little bit while I'm speaking. I'm trying not to do that, and I'm shaking because this is so important to me. So let me just shift hands and see if I stop shaking here. So I'm asking you what you think about this idea, which is I feel like we should create more ads that empower women and show them in a new way, so that, like we were talking about beliefs, it's not whether you and I believe a particular ad, but if we believe everyone else believes it. What about just like the music at the protest? What if we bombarded our culture with new ad busters of our own and new ads that showed the way we want it to be? And then I've been thinking about this a long time, and videos of how we want it to be. And if those were just everywhere, and you had a choice of which way you want to go, then you'd look at the things that were more empowering to all of us. So I wonder what you think about the role. I'm going to try to bring it all together about how you think that we should be honoring the feminine in this new way. And okay, that's what I want to say.
Yeah. Sometimes when we look at how deeply people's ideas and perceptions have to change, we think, okay, the solution is education. We're going to feed these new ideas and concepts through the education pipeline. But now we're realizing that, as Marshall McLuhan said, the medium is the message. And that no matter what the curriculum is, what the content of the curriculum is. Anything that's in the box of education is not going to be that different. The same thing might go for, and I know you were just kind of, looking for words, but or different messages. See, I'm on the way to respond to the cliche about honoring the feminine, because I think that we all, affirm that like you, I'm hesitant to say feminine values, because what are masculine values? We've kind of associated masculine with a lot of the destructive things. But I think that is really true masculinity. To move away from masculine values toward feminine values, or is it that we need to heal masculine values, or we learn what masculine values are, at the same time as we do the same for feminine values? But I think that there's a lot of I guess I really don't have a simple answer for that,
My question is, overall, would showing women, much more balanced, loving, flattering way help us all to do that? That's my question.
Sounds good to me. Let's move on to another question, and something else might come to me.
Thanks. Hello? Hi, I'm Henry Eisenstein, and I just want to kind of expand on what I feel is you're saying is the key. It's a shift of paradigm from the current paradigm of separation of power, of nothing happens unless you exert force, and the fact is something that has been by the world the way it is now, our ideas, our society, and the critical importance of how to get out of that paradigm, how to open up, and I think that's the key word, is to open up to the fact that that's not necessarily the way it is. And to me, it's finding some way to make a central intelligence of accepting the fact that there is, I call it a larger perspective. I think it's what you were talking about, the intelligence of the universe. It's not just an idea, it's real. And I speak of this from personal experience, that once that's done, and it takes daily practice, because what we construct our world as has been going on our whole lives. And so daily practice, whether it's meditation or something, to inculcate that acceptance of there is a larger perspective. And in that perspective, things are possible that we can barely imagine now. Where the water can know where it wants to be. Where it's not just a matter of acting on force. It's a larger perspective, and it's a matter for everyone to have that personal intention, that high priority of finding a way to make that like a core belief.
Okay, I'm just going to, one thing that's just popping into my head with this. One of the really deep kinds of programming that I would say is part of the old story is the conquest of nature. And we internalize that as the conquest of self, which means that anything good in the world has to come through great effort. Whether it's, reshaping the landscape, and building pyramids and doing making great efforts to change the outside world, or we take the same mentality and make great efforts to change ourselves. So you hear about some new teaching or some old teaching or some way of being different than you are right now that's really appealing to you, and then the habit is, okay, what do I have to do to get there? It's going to be hard because again, there's no, this attitude says there's no will of the universe in and of itself to make these changes. So what do I have to do? And I'm not saying that there's no place for meditation or something like that. I probably pretty much agree with what you're saying, but I just want to throw in this other little piece of awareness that to really question the idea that this is going to be some new campaign of changing yourself. And I would say that actually the transition into a paradigm of interconnection, interbeing, interdependency, this transition is happening to you. It's happening. And for me, when I feel into that, I'll try it on. I'll say, Charles, you don't have to do anything. It's going to happen. It is happening. Part of me is like, whoa, can't go there because then I'll be lazy. If I don't kind of make myself, work on myself. There's fear that comes up there. Well, okay, maybe I do need to work on myself. Maybe I do need to make efforts, but I don't want that to come from this reflexive, habitual response that because that's the way that I and this whole culture approach everything. It's going to be hard. Hard equals good, easy equals bad. The conquest of the self. So I'm just, so yes. And also entertain the possibility that we are riding a wave of change. If personal transformation comes with great effort, then if you have made a personal transformation, you get to take credit for it. You made those hard efforts, unlike some people who they didn't try very hard. Or what if it's surrender that is necessary? Well, at least I surrendered. Or at least I was willing to surrender. So what if 95% of spiritual work is an elaborate attempt to be able to like yourself and to tell yourself that you're good, and then secretly that you're better than other people, and then why are you feeling like that you're being sanctimonious? And why? And because one of the deep teachings of separation is that you're bad. It's explicit in biology, in orthodox biology. All beings are motivated to maximize reproductive self-interest, whether or not that is at the expense of other beings. That's a pretty good definition of evil. Economics says rational self-interest. So we have a deep, and it's in religion too, a deep teaching, you are bad. Goodness comes through the overcoming of itself. So again, let's deprogram ourselves from that way of thinking.
You made a couple of points that stuck to me. One was about force, and then even more importantly, you talked about Mycelium networks. And I've been studying about that actually lately. And I had a light bulb moment myself that in biology, especially when you deal with things like nature and soil, that they're not actually that different from our organic cells. So if we were to strip down, the flesh, the difference of culture or ethnicity or religion to our barest being, what change, not in a forceful way, but outside of our social norms, I guess, is how do we encourage people to step outside of our social norms as if they don't see any barriers like the mycelium network, that there are not those roads, and for us, those roads and that pavement, that inorganic matter for us becomes our communities, like stepping outside of our communities and reaching out to each other. Is that something you would say that we should practice more often, or we should just allow it to happen? And I hope that question makes sense. It wasn't on the report.
Yeah, I'm not 100% clear on exactly what you're asking, but I'll just kind of go with what I think you might be asking. Yeah. I mean, the real general question is, what should I do? Sometimes I think that people are asking me to insult them when they ask me what to do. Because, like, you already know what to do. But these things seem to be futile. But let me say a couple of things about what to do. Ordinarily, the way that we're taught to decide what to do is you try to kind of calculate what the effects will be. If I do this, then this will happen. If I do that, then that will happen. If I purchase clothes at the Gap, then I support the economic system that forces people into sweatshop labor. If I drive my car, it produces carbon dioxide, which has an effect of heating the atmosphere. If I do X, then Y happens. If I do A, then B happens. And so the implication is that you learn more and more about how the world works so that you are more and more clear about the consequences of your actions, and then you make choices based on what those consequences will be. That, you could call that way of thinking instrumental utilitarianism. And again, it's very similar to the mindset of money. I think that mindset is part of the problem, and that is not how to make choices. So an alternative might be when deciding how am I going to use my life energy, because I really care about the world. How am I going to use my life energy? An alternative might be to make the choice that makes you feel the most alive. Even if you cannot say how that is going to change the world. Maybe that choice is to take care of your grandmother. Maybe that choice is to take care of a lost puppy. Maybe that choice, like just this weekend, I ran into a guy who left the corporate world and took on a totally new career of building dry stone walls. I ran into another guy, a woman who had been a psychotherapist, quit her job to become a mail carrier, a letter carrier. And everybody was saying, how could you? You were helping so many people. And she could not give an answer. She could not justify her decision. Justify meaning, well, it'll have this, this, and this effect. And we're still in the habit of justifying our decisions. Maybe that's part of the problem. Maybe we need to make choices in a different way, because to really think that we can calculate and control the effects of our actions is quite arrogant. And that's the mindset of technology. And again, we find unintended consequences of our technologies. Each technology solving the problems created by previous technologies. Oh, we have a problem with weeds in the field. Well, let's spray pesticides, herbicides. Oh, now there are super weeds. What's the solution? A super herbicide. And now the soil bacteria is dying and fungus infections are rampant among the crops. What's the solution? A fungicide. And each one of these, yeah, it solves the immediate problem. But it's an addiction to control. So anyway, I've drawn somewhat of a tenuous connection here, but what I'm really saying is the revolution that we're in right now goes much deeper than applying the same mindset of instrumental utilitarianism to a new goal. We're stepping into a different way of being. So what makes you feel most alive? And it might be to talk about mycelial networks to people and to open them up to the wonder of life and how the soil is as complex as a brain and how the plant world is intelligent. Like Michael Pollan has an article about that in New Yorker last month, you know? Like this kind of airy-fairy stuff is no longer in some separate realm from science and practicality. I mean, this is real stuff. I mean, and maybe that's what makes you feel alive, you know, to open people to the wonder of that. Or maybe what makes you feel alive is to do something on a community level, you know, or maybe it could be something on a political level, or maybe it could be something very, very personal and relational. And follow that. Because, again, we've seen this destination and we don't know how to get there. There's no map. All of the maps are obsolete. Whatever the maps offer is not enough. The maps offer us only despair. The maps offer only impossibility. We don't know how to get there. So we have to follow a different guidance, you know, an invisible path. And the guidance on that path is that feeling of being alive, I think. What makes me feel alive?
So, a good question for
And, I mean, you know, there's tons of research about how that doesn't work and all that kind of thing. The paradigm from which that whole system comes is a force-based paradigm that essentially says that, okay, what these people really want to do is to, you know, rape and kill and rob, you know, and that's where their self-interest lies, that's where their pleasure lies, so we have to oppose that with a threat. So it's based on a profound othering of the people that we classify as criminals. And at the beginning I was talking about how we just address things at the most proximal level of cause. And that's one of them, you know. Someone is hurting people, well, lock them away so you can't hurt people anymore. And the assumption is that is like that person's nature. And it's based, I guess, on a deeper level on a philosophy called dispositionism, which says that people do good things because they're good people and people do bad things because they're bad people. So I'm not going to say too much more about it because that leads to a big conversation, but yeah.
as parting words, are you called to share with us tonight?
What do you think is part of what?
As parting words, are you called to share
parting
with
words
us tonight?
guess I would just invite you to feel the presence of that childlike knowing that I talked about before. I phrased it as the knowing that we live in a living, intelligent universe. Another part of that knowing is that each of us has a unique and necessary gift to give in service to that intelligence. Every child knows it. The things and I just want you to feel the presence of that. Even if it triggers cynicism and sadness and doubt. And you don't have to do anything about it. But just touching on that knowledge accelerates a process that's happening already. And that's just true. It's not a substitute for action and doing. It changes us so that actions that once seemed that knowledge for a while, just enjoy it. And if you want, see it in other people too. You can encounter somebody and be like, oh, what gift does this person have? You know, it's kind of a curiosity and a wonder. And just like Pancho, you know, when you see people with those eyes, it creates an invitation. Because we all need help believing it. I certainly do. You know? And when someone's seen me in that way, then that part of me becomes more alive. Yeah. So thank you for that question.
Thank you.